Hello, everyone. Welcome again. Welcome. Come on in, share the live. We have a great conversation tonight. We're going to talk about Black facts, inoculating Black LGBTQ voters against anti-LGBTQ messaging and all the things that is coming in to affect our voice and our vote this year in this critical election that we have coming up in days, right? In under 50 days. I think we're around 40 something days now. I've said this before, and I say this all the time, that this is an election that you cannot sit out, and you have to be very, very, very careful with the information that you're getting and the information that you're sharing, because there's so much things I've seen a few times, over the past week, about people talking about sitting out the election, voting for third party, because they're comfortable. They're in a comfortable blue state, so they feel they can vote. That this is not the time to play that game, right? Let me just be real. It's not the time to play that game, because if you think that, enough people think that, your comfortable blue state can become a red state, and then what are you going to do then, right? So that's why I'm so happy that I'm able to be joined this evening by the amazing Victoria Kirby York, Director of Policy and Programs at National Black Justice Coalition. So I'm going to stop talking because I want to hear the information that Victoria's going to bring on. So here we go. Victoria, hey.
Hey, family. So excited to be with you. Thank you for the invitation, Kenya. I so love watching you step into this new role and everything that you're doing with the Center for Black Equity and the CBE PAC. As a former board member of CBE, does my heart a lot of pride. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's you joined us for one call before you join us again. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're one of my favorite people to work with. You're always so pleasant, so nice, and so informative. So I'm going to stop running my mouth. Do you want to talk a little bit about NBJC and the work you all are doing, and then we can get right into the show?
Yes. So NBJC, the National Black Justice Collective, is a civil rights organization that fights on behalf of Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving people and families, including people living with HIV and AIDS. We are fiercely and unapologetically all of who we are, unapologetically Black, unapologetically queer, trans, and gender expansive oriented. And this new research we have out called Black Facts is just another way of us showing it. I'll dig into that in a bit, but I'm really excited to be here with you. As shared, I'm the Director of Public Policy and Programs. And just so I don't forget, when I get really into Black Facts, this beautiful piece of art right here that was commissioned and created by a Black queer artist, Rebecca Crouch, is the award that we give for the James Baldwin Legacy Awards. It features the honorees from that year. And we have our next award ceremony a week from today at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And so you can tune in there on YouTube, Facebook, can leave comments about our honorees for this upcoming year. We've got a lot of really great surprises in store for you. And I wanted to make sure I led with it instead of ended with that announcement so that you all get those facts as well. And do you want me to go ahead into the presentation? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, go right on in. I want to make sure we have enough time to get all the information, because I can already see in the chat people are here and want to learn and want to get this information. So I'm stepping to the side. There you go.
All right. So before I dig in, I want to tease a little bit what Kenya led with around this whole notion of sitting out the election. NBJC is a 501c3 nonpartisan organization, but what I can tell you about both of the major party candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, is that both of them understand the power of the vote and the power of a presidential mandate. And presidential mandates, which means what they go into office on day one thinking about, is not set by the people who sit out an election. Not at all. They're not considered at all. The mandate comes from who showed up, and when they filled out that exit poll or gave exit poll answers, what were the issues that motivated those voters to show up at the polls. So regardless of who wins the election, they're going to be looking at who showed up for them and on what issues. And that is how day one executive orders on equity, like what we saw with President Biden, happened. It's also how we saw early executive orders with President Trump that put civil rights exemptions through almost every agency in the federal government. So what happens it really is shaped by those who show up, not those who set it out. I'm going to quit preaching to the choir and dig into these facts. All right. So when we talk about inoculating Black voters from anti-LGBTQ plus attacks, this isn't just baked in from our ideals of what might happen. It's based in some reality of what we've already seen. So to begin this presentation, I'm going to make the case for Black voter inoculation and why it's needed. And that's really this concept of making sure that our community is prepared for whatever, the onslaught of different messages are going to be from people who are not supportive of our community. So we're going to dig into what's happened before, and particularly in the last midterm election in 2022, what's happening now. Some of y'all might already be seeing this. And then dig into the research's findings to help you all understand where the Black voters' values, perceptions, attitudes, and commitment to Black LGBTQ plus people and issues are. We'll dig through what the data says around building support and solidarity for Black LGBTQ plus people and issues, and also dig into ways that we can change the narrative. And that's a part of inoculation. It's not enough to educate the community. You also have to tease up some action that folks can take, which helps to minimize opportunity for people to be moved by misinformation, disinformation, and flat out lies. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, we had one of the largest, if not the largest, sampling of Black voters ever done to look at issues impacting Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving people and families. It was commissioned by NBJC and the national kind of mainstream LGBTQ orgs that historically are now ran by Black people. So we'll dig into more about who those organizations are in a moment. But first, I'm going to dig into what brings us here tonight. In the 2022 midterm elections, there was $50 million spent targeting Black and Hispanic Latinx voters in that election. A good chunk of it was spent in that last week. It included Stephen Miller's America First Legal, which spent $4 million just in that last week of the election on Black and Spanish language radio in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Their C4 arm, Citizens for Sanity, blanketed these same states with direct mail. I remember the last week of the election, people were texting me, Vic, you seen this? Sending me pictures of door knockers and mail pieces that came into the hood, to Black communities, places where our folks live, that had these blatant anti-LGBTQ and especially blatantly anti-trans messaging. They also put money on Black radio. So in a moment, you'll hear an ad that played on Radio 1, and those familiar with Radio 1 know that it's a syndicate. So there are Radio 1 stations all across the country. You pay to go on Radio 1, you're paying to be able to influence radio stations across the country in key states. And that is exactly what they did. The TV ads that went up in our communities, one example was attacking gender affirming care in Arizona. There was a series of ads that focused on targeting trans kids and inclusion in sports. And there was also an ad that tried to build on this LGBTQ grooming narrative that we know is not true. So don't take my word for it. You can watch the ad for yourself.
She trains at 6 a.m. every morning. She spent years working to shave off seconds. She's the captain of her school's team. He's just a mid-pack finisher. But not today. Unfortunately, this competition was over before it even began. Woke left-wing politicians are destroying girls' sports. Tell Biden and his radical allies, no men in girls' sports.
Feel free to throw in the comments. I can't read them, but Kenya, feel free to interrupt and read some that you see. But that ad completely distorted trans inclusion in sports. And you'll note, especially the inclusion of the Black cisgender woman athlete who, they talk about having, served in leadership roles on her track team. And really that was an attempt to pull on Black voters' support of athletics and sports, and trying to use that, especially our pride and our Black track stars. Because, just looking at this past Olympics, the melanin wins these track races, honey. The melanin be popping in these track races. And so, there was some intent behind choosing track and field as one of the, as the sport that they showcased for their narrative. So yeah, that was the TV ad. Now this is the Radio 1 ad that played.
The following is a paid political ad. Radio 1 does not endorse the views or opinions expressed in this ad.
Not long ago, everyone knew that you were either born a boy or girl. Not anymore. The Biden administration supports letting children change their names, clothes, identities, and bodies. Biden and his left-wing allies want to make it easier for boys to take estrogen to appear more feminine. They want to make it easier for girls to take testosterone so they grow facial hair. Biden and progressive leaders want to let kids take puberty blockers to keep them from developing into men and women. These drugs can leave you sterile, infertile, impotent. Biden and the New Left even want to make it easier for teens and young adults to get surgery to remove breast and genitals. They would allow boys in our daughters' bathrooms and sports teams. And now, the Biden administration is planning to issue new rules that will push doctors to prescribe dangerous drugs, and worse, to facilitate these changes or face charges of discrimination. Tell President Biden and left-wing leaders across America, hands off our kids. Paid for by America First Legal.
I still have moments of speechlessness listening to it. And I remember listening to it on the radio 2 years ago. And because of the timing of the ads, there was not a lot of time to really build a response. And by the week before the election, a lot of the ad, if not all of the ad buys, have already been filled. And so you don't really have an opportunity to respond in kind immediately when all of the TV airtime has been purchased and bought up weeks in advance. And so they pushed out these messages. One of the things you'll note, it was clearly a Black man's voice, right? Like, we didn't have to see the brother. We knew he was a brother, right? No question about it. And it was devoid of any context of what transgender people, and particularly kids, are going through. Essentially, they were mansplaining, cishet mansplaining what they believed gender affirming care to be, which is framed and put in a narrative that doesn't speak to the truths that we know our community members live with, or the benefits of gender affirming care when it comes to the mental health and well-being of trans kids, and also their ability to start their educational careers in college, their professional lives, as the person that they were always born to be. And so those ads were a part of what we witnessed in 2022. I'm going to play next. Okay. Oh, before we go to where we are now, in addition to the TV and radio ads, we also saw these direct mail pieces mailed out to Black communities and also Hispanic and Latinx communities, which of course includes our Afro-Latinx folks out there. And so again, they focused in on trans inclusion in bathrooms and locker rooms. Now we know that doing anything harmful in a bathroom is a crime for anybody. And we also know that it's not trans people committing those crimes, right? We also know that school systems have been dealing with the issue without any problems. Yet they're trying to create a problem that doesn't exist because they know they can leverage people's ignorance and pure lack of knowledge about the trans community to instill fear. I saw this play out in 2015 on the ground when the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance was trying to pass. It would have also given Black people in Houston, which y'all know there's a lot of Black folks in Houston, civil rights protections for the first time. But they put out similar ads to this that pushed the Black community in a frenzy, and without inoculating messages, there wasn't really a solid answer. So Black folks voted against our own interests, having civil rights protections in the third largest city in America because of exploited transphobia. The backside of this ad focused on gender affirming care. The version you see to the right is the Spanish language version of the ad that went out. So wanted to make sure that you all get a sense of what happened that we didn't have really good. We didn't have the ability to time to really think about what our responses could be or should be during the last election. And unfortunately, it's already happening again. They're not waiting until the last week of the election. I was in Greensboro, North Carolina this past weekend, and my wife was watching a football game, and literally there was a college football game Saturday night. Just within an hour of her watching this game, the ad I'm about to show you played 8 times, sometimes back to back.
This is the Jim Heath Channel playlist of 2024 campaign ads.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Be sure to subscribe to the Jim Heath Channel for all the new campaign 2020.
Now, with this ad, my issue is less the content, honestly, because in our opinion, those are actually the kinds of policies that create a more inclusive democracy and nation. But again, it's void of context. It's void of what we know happens to trans women and girls when they're placed in the wrong prison cells, and when there's no choice there. It's devoid of the context of what it's like to live your life and not to be able to live it true to who you are. It's devoid of any trans voices, right? So again, it's people who aren't in the trans community projecting their own ignorance onto the rest of the country. My biggest issue with this particular ad is that it creates literally an us versus them narrative versus our country should really be for all of us, and how do we make sure that all of us are included? And they use gender neutral pronouns in a play on words to create a divisive narrative. So I know this presentation is not going to be about like slicing and dicing political campaign ads, but what I did want you to see is that they're not wasting time. They're starting earlier than they did last time with these messages. And they're, again, still being targeted about it. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they're going to be targeting Black voters in the same way that they did.
This is the Jim Heath Channel playlist of 2024 campaign ads.
Kamala support.
All right. So now let's dig into the data. You all see what the problem is, right? You are probably feeling in your gut right now after watching those 3 ads, and there were more that went out during that period. Those are just the ones that I chose to play for this presentation. Without having some meaningful, measured, tested by research language to appeal to Black voters on the front end, we're stuck too far behind in the race scenario. So want to dig into our data, but first I want to give you all some foundational considerations about this data set. So as I mentioned earlier, it was commissioned by NBJC alongside other national organizations that are led by Black people, the National LGBTQ Task Force, who's led by Kiara Johnson, the National Council for Lesbian Rights, who's led by Imani Rupert Gordon, Family Equality, who at the time was led by James Black, who's now at the Trevor Project, and GLSEN, who's headed by Melanie Willingham Jaggers. And Hit Strategies is a Black same gender loving man owned polling and research firm. There's only a handful, I think 2 or 3 Black owned research and polling firms in the nation, and Hit Strategies is one of them. Please also note our approval process and where you can submit requests if you're interested in citing our work here. One of the things that makes this body of research significant and unique is that it is a survey of 1,300 Black people from all across the country, from a variety of demographics, whether that's age, gender identity, sexual orientation, region, religion, educational experience. And this survey oversampled Black LGBTQ plus people. So it also gave us some good data about our own intersection and community. And what makes it truly historic is that many surveys that gauge attitudes will focus in on Black people, Black issues, or LGBTQ people and LGBTQ issues. But we believe that this research is unique and historic, and that it gauges the attitudes among the broader Black community on Black LGBTQ plus people and issues. So just so you can get a sense of who of our oversample and the demographics included in this study, you can see, the percentage that we have of Black people who identify as LGBTQ. When you look at our demographic profile, you can see the percentage that identifies as different aspects and parts of our community. And then you can also get a sense of where people in our community stand on a variety of different value points. So for instance, 89% of our community thinks that the Black community should do more to support us. We have more data you can dig into on our website about some of these other attitudes. The key findings, so if y'all are looking for what's the slide I should screenshot and share, this one's a good one because it highlights our 7 big key findings from the report. The first is that support exists. Still to this day, people make stereotypes about the broader Black community and try to make it seem like we're more homophobic or transphobic, biphobic, et cetera, than other folks. But a plurality of Black people believe that the Black community should be doing more to protect Black LGBTQ plus people, especially our young people. Number 2, Black people are movable. Black people, especially those who are active accomplices, who are like down to get dirty in the mud with us, who stand with us 10 toes down, and even passive allies, folks that are like, I love you, boo, but I ain't showing up to a protest. When they're exposed to compelling messages, can be moved to do even more in support of our community, which includes talking to voters about candidates and policies that support us. Number 3, Black by default. Black people default to seeing all Black people as Black, first and foremost. However, when promoted to consider intersectional identities, whether that's gender-based, like talking about issues impacting Black women, or queer sexual identities, that support declines. So as long as we're talking Blackity Black Black, everybody's like, power to the people. I'm Black and I'm proud. But we have to do more work, and we have to know that we need to do more work to remind people that all Black people are Black, even when we start talking about our intersections. All right. So number 4, this one kind of stung. I'm not gonna lie. There's some things that you like consciously know and unconsciously know, subconsciously know. This is something that I could have kept in my subconscious. But number 4 is that Black people believe there are some Black folks, many Black folks, that believe that white is queer by default. So the opposite of what we talked about in number 3, that Black people, and we see that Black people who believe Black queer people lead with our queer identity are least likely to be supportive. So as we'll dig into more, there are some people that when the moment they hear, oh, I'm Black and I'm a Black lesbian, they hear, oh, white. And I'm like, nah, melanin. We'll dig into more of those stats in a moment. But that was one of the key findings. Number 5, which I believe is really important as we talk about election messages, is that Black unity is the pathway to increasing support. Diverse Black people overwhelmingly share the same values. So whether you come from rural Black America in the Beltway and in the Black Belt and elsewhere, or you come from cities or from suburbia, all different backgrounds, we share the same values, particularly around unity. And so threats against Black LGBTQ plus people increases in support when Black people are reminded of our shared values around unity. And we have some compelling messages that can be leveraged in your outreach to voters, which we'll get to momentarily. Number 6 is that there needs to be a focus on the movable middle. As a person who cut my teeth doing candidate work prior to coming back to the LGBTQ movement, oftentimes campaigns think about the persuasion universe as, I mean, typically in their mind, it's like a rural or suburban white person, essentially. When we talk about suburban white people, often they're talking about white women. When they're talking about rural white people, often it's a nod to like more moderate white men in certain communities, right? But when we think about persuasion, we should be thinking outside of those outdated concepts. We should be thinking about the movable middle as people who may be supportive of our issues, but don't believe that that voting is the key to getting there, right? We need to think about our passive supporters of LGBT rights as a top target for messaging. Those people who are like, yeah, I support my gay son or my trans daughter, but I'm still not going to the polls on Monday because I gotta work, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. Or maybe they're being persuaded by folks who are against our rights. And so talking about focusing on the movable middle and passive supporters of our community can also help to bring people back into supporting the issues and the candidates who are going to advance progress for all Black people. Additional targets that can be focused on that fit within this that we found from our data are young voters, women, older voters, and people in the Northeast region, New York and further north. And finally, number 7, proximity matters. Social proximity to LGBTQ plus people is correlated with support. So going back to the person who has a child who's a member of our community or a sibling that's a member of our community, they're more likely to think about policy priorities that impact us than folks who don't believe they know someone who's LGBTQ. All right. So digging in a little bit more deeply, and feel free to drop your questions in the box for Kenya to catalog. We can come to them. You can also save them for the end. But when we look at key finding number 1, that a majority of Black people believe the Black community should do more to protect Black LGBTQ plus people. The younger the person is, the more likely they are to hold this belief. For example, 73% of Generation Z, that is folks who are born after like 1996, I believe is where they start. Some argue 2000, just depends on how you feel about generational lines. Anyway, 73% of that generation agree that the Black community should do more to support our community. Some of the questions in the survey polls, and we also did focus groups, I should say, which were really, really fantastic ways to get more insights from folks. If you go to our website, nbjc.org/blackfacts, and pull up some of the slides that are there, you can also click to listen and hear the feedback from people who are in the focus groups. I'm trying to keep this presentation tight tonight, so I'm not gonna play those tonight, but you can check them out yourself. You can see here where people landed on different statements. So for instance, this piece around the Black community needing to do more to support us. You can see that we have, a majority of folks who are in that strongly agree, somewhat agree space. And question 22, which was, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? I should do more. And that put the onus back on the individual respondent that they should do more to support Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving people. And again, you see more than 50% feel that social responsibility to do more than they've already been doing to support our community. Often the follow-up question is, but what should I do, right? Like I want to support, how can I, what does that look like? Well, in the context of the election, it's make sure that you show up to vote and that you vote for candidates and ballot initiatives that are going to improve our life and not cause us more harm. When looking at the movable middle, shared fate was a big piece that really kept Black folks with us, or helped to bring more people who initially were like, nah, they good over there, to help bring them over to let's support all Black people's side. So this concept of shared fate is something that is really important, and you can see where these shifts occurred between active accomplices and passive allies. Our ops, also known as opponents, weren't really moved. So just like in other campaigns, I wouldn't waste that much time on people who aren't with us, won't ever be with us, but there is some space to do a lot more to move passive allies into active accompliceship. Digging in, and Kenya shared that as questions come up, they'll be popped on the screen. And I appreciate y'all commenting and loving on the presentation so far. I appreciate those affirmations and feedback. Because it's late over here on the East Coast, so we're gonna keep moving. Black people's default, again, is that all Black people are Black. You can see the stats around that. 86% of Black people nationally report having a feeling of shared fate and connectivity with other Black people in the US. That is much lower when we talk about shared fate toward the Black LGBTQ plus community. This speaks to what I said earlier about the moment we start talking about intersectionality, there are some people who no longer then sees us, read us as Black. That piece falls. And so you have to do something to bring that back. That's in part what you see our opposition trying to do with these ads, is like, they're not really one of y'all. They're one of them, right? Like it goes back to them trying to use our language against us in a way. So you see that around half, 51% of Black people still feel that shared fate with our community, with the highest response coming from the youngest Black people. But that also means that 49% aren't there, or don't remain there, I should say. And that's why we have to do the inoculation. The support is soft. So compelling ads from ops can definitely shift people backwards and in the wrong direction. People who were, the folks who are in that 51%, who are more likely to see their fate intertwined with ours, were more receptive to messaging urging increased support. And so these are some of the folks that you want to be able to cater your campaign messages towards and movement messages towards to help make sure that people remain inoculated from the BS. You can see how that support, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of what happens to each group impacts people like you. So the whole concept is, for instance, with Black folks, what happens to other Black people, how much do you think that's going to impact your life as a Black person? 71% were on the a lot of shared fate, 15% with that some shared fate. So quick math, that's where you get that 86% number from. And again, you see how it falls when we're talking about Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, same gender loving folks. We get to that 51%. And it falls even lower when we're talking about Black transgender or gender nonconforming people. We're then looking more at 49%. So a couple points lower. Number 4, I'm going back to those key findings with some more data for you to chew on. Black people who think Black LGBTQ plus people lead with queer identity were least likely to be supportive of Black LGBTQ plus people and issues. And where this data had me like, I didn't need to know this, was there's a belief, and this came up in the focus group conversations, there's a belief that because we have a perceived proximity to whiteness, because there are white people who are LGBTQ plus and same gender loving, that if we are in a bind, they must have our back. So the white part of them is going to help us be able to move past the discrimination that we face. And on top of that, voters who believe that way also thought that in some way, because of that connection with white people who are LGBTQ plus, that the gains for the LGBTQ community came at the harm of the Black community. And so there's some meat there that I look forward to us digging into more deeply as we continued with the survey questions, though, and people start to learn more about the negative impacts that our community faces, especially disproportionately. Folks began to see, oh, that added identity actually means that there are additional harms to you, not additional protections. And that's why we're still fighting for public policy that's going to support all of us. You see in the data how it shows up. The first question is, which part of their identity do you think Black LGBTQ people identify with most? So again, these are responses of non-LGBTQ plus Black people. These are our cishet friends and family. 52% are like about equally, we unapologetically Black and queer and trans and gender expansive. There's a 13% number that believes that we lead with our Black identity first. But this 34% number, these are the people who believe that we lead first with our sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, and that in some way that means the proximity to whiteness has some benefit to us, which is in their mind how they deal with the concept of thinking, okay, they are not Black, we're not Black people, in the same sense of shared fate with them. And that's part of the inoculation and talking more about our own experiences and what life is like, and centering Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving people in our messaging. So not having someone not of the community talk about our issues as we saw in those ads, but centering us helps to shift some of that thinking. And then you actually get the data on where people really fall. So in looking at the responses of Black LGBTQ plus people, you see that we're at 61% of equally for both, whereas queer as we are Black, to borrow wisdom from our ancestors. 26% lead with racial identity. So again, that's double what the perception is about our community. And that leaves the remaining for orientation and gender identity, which again is a lot less than what you see on this chart from the perception side. Around our key findings, Black unity in terms of messaging and focusing on our youth are the pathways to inoculate our voters. That is the pathway to increase support. And again, Black people from all backgrounds overwhelmingly share these same values. There are taglines that we tested in the surveys. You'll be able to see more of that in a moment. But some of the examples around Black unity were, if you're Black, and we're all part of the same struggle. And being LGBTQ plus does not make someone less Black or make them less deserving of support from Black people. Those resonated strongly across most Black people in different subgroups of our community. 60% of Black people reported concern about youth suicide after being shown statistics about the heightened rate among Black LGBTQ plus youth. This included 47% of self-reported opponents of LGBTQ rights. So again, this was an issue that whether you're a passive ally, an active accomplice, or an op, folks were like, we have to do something about our kids taking their lives. And so when we see these ads about gender affirming care and trans inclusion in sports, we have to connect the reasons we fight for those policies around the realities of our kids' mental health and well-being, because they really are tied together, not just statistically and not just for kind of the model images that we see of our community, but it's really huge for the Black community. We are at a record high number of Black women and girls with suicide attempts. And I should have had a trigger warning at the top of this. I apologize. And heightened completions around our Black men and boys. And we need more data around non-binary, gender non-conforming kids. So in terms of a tagline that was particularly powerful for all Black people, 85% of the Black community favored the tagline, "Our youth are not disposable. We cannot keep losing Black LGBTQ plus children to suicide." And so really naming the impact of what these harmful ads do in real life, not in play fantasy land where they live, but in real life, is an important way to inoculate our voters. Blackness and our collective responsibility to each other as members of the Black community also strongly resonated. So we have to look out for each other, and that means looking out for our kids' mental health as an example. Passive supporters of LGBTQ rights are really big targets for messaging and action. Again, a focus on unity is really big and really important. And adding context and examples of how certain policies would impact Black, queer, and trans and gender expansive people in particular is really important in terms of moving the needle and keeping people engaged and off the apathy couch. That's what I call it. The apathy couch is where people go when they set out elections. No judgment, some judgment. I apologize. Number 7, social proximity to LGBTQ plus people is correlated with support. So this goes back to some of the campaigns and initiatives going back to the late 80s and 90s, where people were pushing folks to invite people in around around our sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, because the more people that people know who are part of our community, the more likely they are to support candidates and issues that impact our life positively. So as you can see here, 82% of Black people have some proximity to members of our community who are same gender loving, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or queer, but only 42% have some proximity to transgender or non-binary or gender expansive people. This is a key stat. This is a key stat when campaigns are talking about how they're going to spend their money on ads, how speechwriters are going to craft the speeches of their candidates, how phone bank and canvassing scripts are written. in terms of conversations in the Black community, as these ads from our ops play, organizers and volunteers on the door are going to hear questions about the trans community. And if y'all volunteers have not been trained on the experiences of Black, trans, non-binary, and gender expansive people, they're going to be set up for some really hard conversations. And some conversations that will cause their own set of harms psychologically for some of those volunteers and staff members that we won't be able to undo. So before we cause additional trauma for people, especially Black LGBTQ plus folks who volunteer or work on campaigns, we need to make sure that we have communications that are created, led, and feature Black, transgender, non-binary, and gender expansive people, because their stories, and especially youth, who feel comfortable sharing their stories, and, their parents, they work that situation out because of minor laws. I want to make sure people are being thoughtful of that. But it's important that their stories are shared and told, and that the stats connected to how gender affirming care, trans inclusion in sports, bathroom and locker room policies, all of that, how that informs their life. I had he probably won't mind me saying this. I'm sure I'll get a text if he's watching that I do. But an elder of ours, a brother, Diego Sanchez, made a comment the other day to me. He said, we were waiting in the bathroom line, and he let someone go in front of him. And he was just like, I'm a trans man, a Puerto Rican trans man who transitioned decades ago. Trust me, I know how to hold it when I'm in line for the bathroom. And literally, I stood there, did not know what to say, because I know that is his truth and the truth of so many other people. And when people watched the movie Hidden Figures and saw that moment happen, when Taraji had to walk a mile or so to use the bathroom, and people were like, damn, that was unacceptable. We still are allowing those moments to happen today to our Black, trans, and non-binary siblings and kids. And so, I just kind of went on a soapbox, but it's important that we recontextualize what our ops are throwing out there, and we don't make the same mistake and errors that they made in doing that. We can't have a cishet person talking about the experiences of trans people and why gender affirming care and trans inclusion matters. That has to be done by Black, trans, gender non-binary, and gender expansive people. All right, I'm going to speed through this section so we can get into our next steps. Let's see, we're getting close to the hour. The values that Black people prioritize were, as you can see here, fairness and equality, respect, and building generational wealth. We be pushing for the reparations, honey. But those are the top three, as you can see, by far, when it comes to some of these other issue areas, value areas. And you can see where men, women, and the LGBTQ voting bloc fell and landed on these values as well. So when you're looking at how to build value-centered messaging, those are areas that we want to talk about. We can't build generational wealth amongst Black LGBTQ plus people when so many of our community members live in poverty, when the average Black trans person makes $10,000 a year, when our folks can't get jobs, our masculine and center women are struggling to get jobs because of discrimination based on how they present in the world. Like, we can't build generational wealth that way, and we definitely can't build respect, fairness, and equality. So being able to link those values to real meaty issues and have them told by messengers that are trusted, super important. The other big thing to note, going back to we Black, like blackity Black, there is little divergence between Black and Black LGBTQ people on most policy priorities, except when it comes to LGBTQ plus and transgender rights. You'll see the top three areas for the broader Black community are healthcare, inflation and the cost of living, and then anti-Blackness, racism, and discrimination, because we know that plays back into our ability to pay for our cost of living and how we are treated in the healthcare system and settings. So As you can see, there are other issues that are important, but these are areas of commonality. And you will also note that where LGBTQ plus rights and transgender rights fall on the list. This is where you can also see some more of where the intersectional drop-offs fall among different segments of our community. When it comes to shared fate with all Black people, 86%. When it comes to Black immigrants, we see 65%. So as you can see, it all just kind of falls down until you see, again, the stat around the Black transgender nonconforming community being 49%. This data points to why they're investing so hard in sending anti-trans messaging into the hood, into Black neighborhoods. And it doesn't matter what the economic status of that neighborhood is. I don't care if it's Potomac or East Tampa. That is where they are funneling some of these messages. And they must be looking at some data somewhere, including a sense of the data that we see here, that they're making that size of an investment in trying to leverage and exploit transphobia to either suppress the Black vote or to push Black voters into voting for our opponents. All right, so when we look at Black LGBTQ people and issues, you see that we are at a 66% support level when it comes to the broader Black community. And it also includes 57% of self-reported frequent churchgoers. Sometimes people think that the root of all homophobia in the Black community and transphobia in the Black community is the Black church. Yes, we have some work to do there. So not gonna let the Black church off the hook completely, but it's not as bad as people perceive it to be. We've talked about proximity quite a bit. I mentioned the piece about gains for the LGBTQ community coming at the expense of the Black community. This is the stat that backs that up, so you can see the numbers for yourself. In terms of the very true, somewhat true, you see 59% believe that to be true. And that's often because they forget that we are part of the LGBTQ community too. They just see Will and Grace, or some of the other prominent white gay folks that come to mind. And so we have to remind them that LGBTQ people have melanin too. And those of us with melanin aren't getting helped out by proximity to whiteness, because we're dealing with racism, homophobia, transphobia, and sexism, ableism, all kinds of things, all on top of each other. And so if we're about helping all Black people, we have to mean that. But those are the numbers for that. When looking at what are some of the ways that the broader Black community would want to be able to be supportive around our community, you see treating the members of our community in their life with respect ranked the highest. You can see where things differ amongst different populations. The second is supporting Black LGBTQ plus businesses, artists, or organizations. So we see support with Lil Nas X or Kehlani or Victoria Monet. Folks are like, yes, hon, get your coins, right? Or the ballroom community, supporting Black trans influencers and leaders like T.S. Madison. These are, those are the kinds of actions that 31% are saying that can be the way that I support Black, queer, and transgender expansive people in my life. And at 26%, we see folks who refuse to be a bystander, who are willing to step in, to move in and stop people from harassing and hurting us. We all work on some of this other stuff with our people. There's some work to do here. But in terms of where people are, I think this also can speak to some of the folks who are would probably be prominent messengers, ideal messengers for the research that you just read as well. Everyday people, for one, and there's a lot of research that backs that up, that the most important influencers are the people we know. But then again, our business owners, organizations like CVE and NBJC. We've talked through that quite a bit. All right, so in addition to fairness and equality, this concept around rights and freedoms is another place where we can really galvanize. There are some candidates that are already galvanizing around the word freedom. And that's a pretty smart strategy, because in looking at people from across our communities and also outside of our communities, people recognize that we have less rights and freedoms than other people, and that's not right. And that needs to be addressed. That everybody in this country should have the same opportunities, rights, and freedoms. And so that messaging is good and strong. Candidates using that are smart to do so. My favorite part of the survey is this data. Might be yours too, perhaps. But these are looking at the various issue areas that the broader Black community found most compelling in terms of seeing something as very concerning and needing like immediate action, urgent action around, action that lawmakers can take, actions that could be placed on a ballot initiative, right? HIV, when it comes to this very concerning, somewhat concerning number, placed the highest. You also see youth suicide right there within the margin of error. And then I look at these three that came in at the 62% rate, pretty similar, as violence facing the LGBTQ plus community, whether that's through gun homicides, hate crimes, or the epidemic of violence facing trans people, Black trans people, particularly Black trans women. And you can see where different people fell. You see that for passive allies, youth suicide, was their highest issue area. But that hate crimes and even more so, hate crimes against the Black trans community were just as high, right? So those are issue areas that are important to put in context and to leverage in inoculating Black voters so that they understand what the real issues are facing our community before they have these fake like narratives that are made up, play out in the ads that they're using to target our community. And you'll see here, I highlighted that for the ops, even folks who were like, we might not even need to talk to them because they're not really shifting. Even in looking at the issue areas that they found concerning, this HIV was the area that we had a majority of our ops say, well, I don't know how I feel about them gay people, but we got to do something about HIV. That is a rallying point. And when we look at the disparity, this is another really a good reason why focusing on HIV is not only the right thing to do, is also smart and strategic, is that make sure, prayerful I don't mess this stat up, but like 90% of white gay men know about and have access to PrEP medication, medications that will prevent the transmission of HIV. When it comes to Black gay men, that number is like 20%. So for folks who are like, oh no, they got proximity to whiteness, they're good. That stat is a huge like cold shower, because it highlights that nope, proximity to whiteness isn't saving us from our people, especially our Black, same gender loving and gay, bisexual, queer plus men from dying. Or not dying, but becoming HIV positive. There's a lot of treatments, less of our people are dying, and still too many of our folks are dying. So I meant that. And there are treatments out there. We got to make sure our people know about them because too often they don't. So this is an area that we can and should be using in elections, because there are inequities baked into the system. There's no accident that 90% of white gay men know about PrEP. The health departments and neighborhoods are getting lots of good money to make sure that the white gay boys know about PrEP and PEP and antiviral treatments. And if black people gonna be about all black people, this is a issue area that we have unity around. We tested some messages around these that can be useful again, and whether it's ads or mail pieces, canvassing and phone banking scripts. The message that tested the best in terms of helping to keep people focused on what is really impacting us was our youth are not disposable. I shared this earlier. We cannot keep losing Black LGBTQ plus children to suicide. I shared this second top performing message earlier. And the third one that you'll hear Dr. David Johns, our CEO, who also wrote the Black paper that you can find on nbjc.org/Black facts. Until all Black people are free, none of us are free. And so you can see where some of these other taglines fell in terms of being convincing, very convincing, somewhat convincing, or not convincing at all. You can see that the message we tested around the Black church not being able to survive without us didn't do as well amongst the folks who are on the not convincing at all. I just think that's because they're ignorant about who the Black LGBTQ plus people are in their life. They don't know it's the minister of music, and sometimes also their pastor. They just don't know, but that's okay. We're gonna keep that tea. We're gonna keep that tea. So useful for ads. I try to be funny. People think I'm corny. I try every so now and then I hit a boom. Anyway, useful for ads. Facts. These are facts that respondents were shown that connected in some ways as well to some of these taglines. So you can see what we were educating the survey respondents, and that'll give some context for how we're able to then track the support around these findings. As a lesbian, put it that way, I was very sad that incarcerated women didn't score higher, but different conversation for a different time. You can see again those percentages around what was total concerning and see what the stats were that we highlighted. The stat that really moved people around HIV was, despite having a reputation as a gay disease, 54% of new HIV diagnoses were among straight Black women. And so that was also a way of talking about the impact on the gay community, but also reminding our like straight cis relatives and friends that this virus does not discriminate, and it is having a huge impact on cishet Black women, straight Black women. And as discussed before, stat on suicide that nearly half, 44% of Black LGBTQ plus youth considered suicide in the past year, and 16% attempted suicide was the stat that also moved people, and is why it was 67% in the very concerning category. And for those who are interested in what our ops had to say, we included a slide where you could see the areas that our ops were like, well, you know, I'm not sure about them, but this moved me a little bit. I thought this was concerning. And so you can see that those three messages that we mentioned earlier fell in the 50% or more category. All right. So we're about to dig into some of the content around the election. This electoral data is significant and unique because too often public surveys and polling make sweeping statements about the views and preferences of Black people. And often we're sampled at smaller numbers than our population. And so the margin of error for what Black people think is a lot higher. This survey, again, is of 1,300 Black people. And so because it's a larger sample size, it allows us to better gauge these views and attitudes. And just as a reminder, we are nonpartisan. So this is, the next few slides are more broadly about the election that could be useful for those of you doing civic engagement work. A majority of Black people who are part of this survey data are satisfied with the direction of the country. But when you look at these different subgroups, you'll notice that it's not distributed evenly, and that there are some populations that barely made it to that, or just quite missed the 50% cutoff, and that is Black folks that live in more rural communities who are feeling more left behind. And you'll also note that Black LGBTQ plus people are not feeling as fully included for many of the reasons that we talked about already, especially with all of the attacks, not just coming from candidates, but from elected officials passing anti-LGBTQ laws, or over 500 anti-LGBTQ bills filed in state legislatures across the country. And there were a significant number of legislation attacking Black people in state houses and from governor's mansions. And so Black LGBTQ plus people have been feeling hit at all sides when it comes to what's happening in this political moment, and probably speaks to while we just at a little over 50% in terms of that positivity about the direction of our country. I found this really interesting. A large majority of Black people have a high vote likelihood and a high sense of voting power, which means we believe that our vote has the ability and the power to create change in our community. It is important to note that younger and more independent people report that feeling less. And so you get that sense when you hear people say, man, I'm sitting out. There's other options to, be civically engaged than voting. That's where some of that shows up. But as you can see here, men and women are pretty similar, with 2/3 believing that our vote is pretty powerful. 61% of non-college educated Black people believe the vote is powerful. 75% of college educated. That's the highest percentage here. Excuse me. Under 50 is 61%. Over 50, 73%. But again, the rural LGBTQ vote and independents are in that lagging 3 categories of feeling like maybe that the population is too small for our vote to have power. But we know that's not true, especially in close elections. As a Floridian who remembers the election in 2000 very well, coming down to 537 votes, there is no community in this country that is too small for their vote to have power. So we have to work to make sure that members of our community, especially folks gathered here, Black LGBTQ plus folks, have a better understanding of how our vote works to influence what public policy is able to be made. All right. So as I close and move to any remaining questions, these are some next actions that you can take with this data. A reminder that though 70% of Black people see a level of importance in supporting Black LGBTQ plus people, nearly half of that awareness is soft, which means easily swayed. That is why inoculation with these messaging points, the values points, and these policy priorities is so important. You have to move the folks who support us to that active accomplice level where nothing our ops say is going to move them back and have them backsliding. The awareness is soft. So we have work to do in making sure that our allies become those active accomplices. And that's going to take education, because people don't know what they don't know or what they've not seen. And so, especially when it comes to our to the Black, transgender, nonconforming, and non-binary community, we have a lot of education that has to happen. We have to educate people on the experiences that we have. The good news is, when faced with this data, this information, Our active accomplices and passive allies remain resolute in their belief that more needs to be done to support Black LGBTQ plus people and issues. But we had to do a lot of education on those data points to keep them there and to move them. You can see, again, even probably after what they learned around HIV, as we saw with that data point, there was even a positive direction move when it comes to our ops. But again, that takes work. We can't assume that folks are going to get there. We have to help them get there. For turnout and persuasion messaging, when you want to look at, okay, well, who are the groups of people within this subset of data that like they just need to be reminded that their vote can be the cause for good and they're going to get where they need to go when it comes to advocating for our people in issues and candidates that support us. This group in the blue box gives you that. 36% Northeast residents were part of our active accomplice block. 35% of our Black secular, atheist, agnostic folks are part of this active accomplice block. 18 women who are 18 to 49, Gen Z, LGBTQ plus people. Those are folks who are in that active accomplice category. Our passive allies, this is who I would say are our persuasion universe, are those passive allies, folks who attend church once or twice a month, people who are 50 and older, unmarried people, suburban people, and women that are outside of that 18 to 49 window. And then for those who still care about the ops, who are like, but if we talk to them about the HIV impacting cishet women, maybe we can get them. You can kind of see where these folks were in terms of percentage of evangelicals, non-college educated brothers, married men, rural people, there, people who attend church more than once a week. And the people, 55% of the people who selected Black masculinity as one of their top values. Those were the groups within the ops segment that had some level of support that we should pay attention to. When it comes to strong messengers for this, one of the insights that I found to be really exciting, because we've seen a lot of research for white folks who like institutions are losing trust in. However, Black people believe that civil rights organizations, more so than other entities, are doing the best job at protecting the Black LGBTQ plus community from harm. We didn't dig into which specific institutions they meant in saying that, but civil rights organizations as a whole are really trusted messengers. And you can see kind of politicians aren't that high, right? So that means they need to have really strong spokespeople who can talk to these issues. Again, people who are directly impacted. Some more strategic guidance. We have to increase that sense of shared fate. That helps, that concept of until all of us are free, none of us are free, or highlighting our youth not being disposable, reminding people of that shared fate around Blackness, especially through the lens of protection and safety around Blackness. Those are areas that we highly recommend movements look to. Lead with Black values. Black LGBTQ plus people deserve the same rights and freedoms as everyone else is one of the taglines that did well. And this, again, looks back at the reality that all Black people emphasize the same values around fairness, equality, respect, and family. And leading with those values are going to be really helpful in breaking through some of that noise that they're hearing from our opponents. Reminding people that Black LGBTQ plus people have fewer rights and freedoms than our Black siblings, and emphasizing that supporting more rights and freedoms for them is in line, for our community, is in line with the values of the Black community. And finally, helping to remind people of their proximity, the people that they actually care about, who are Black and LGBTQ. And sometimes that can be, you know, their favorite celebrities, people that they follow and just didn't know, you know, like people still finding out Queen Latifah one of us. And I'm like, I mean, we've been knew that. But, it, you know, considering she still has one of the top rated shows on TV is a big deal for people, especially folks of her generation. And reminding people that Black queer people are Black. We must not forget that as a tagline. Helps to remind people of their proximity, of the people in their lives who are a part of our community and thus need to be protected and protected by their vote. So some next actions. You can use this data. Again, it's at nbjc.org/blackfacts to identify demographic and psychographic segments of Black people that are most responsive to these paths. We laid out several different options for you that you can use in your civic engagement, voter education communications, for any ads, whether they're digital, TV, or radio, for speeches that folks are going to be giving. Instead of just naming gender affirming care, describe it in context for what it actually does, so words can't be taken out of context in ways that exclude our community members or stigmatize our community members. Think about how it can be used in the targeting through the voter file of what voters you're engaging, what communities you're engaging, and also the language that is going to be on the scripts, whether they're phone banking scripts or canvassing scripts, whether those are canvassing on the doors in neighborhoods or at high traffic events, or whether if it's not in the script, providing a talking point sheet that has some of these data points on it that can then be leveraged when the conversation comes up. So your canvasser at the door isn't caught not being educated about the stance or about the reality. Number 2, leverage targeted Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving inclusive ads. If you're doing an ad or some kind of action that is focused on the Black community, don't just assume, well, you know, we said Black, that means Black LGBTQ plus people. To inoculate people, to inoculate the Black voting block, you have to educate the Black voting block, right? So anytime you talk about all Black people, we need to also like name the specific needs and realities of Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving people. Same can be true for Black immigrants, Black women, Black disabled people, you know, a whole host of other intersections. And we have to build on, we see that right now with what they're doing, focusing on the Haitian community, right? We have to have stronger responses to support our Black folks who are Haitian immigrants or Haitian descendant. Otherwise, our people aren't inoculated against the anti-immigrant, anti-migrant attacks that are coming. We have to build on those messages of Black unity, family, and fairness. And we have to be in front of our ops. It's a lot harder to bring someone back to our side when they've already been recruited to our opponents. We have to get them fired up and ready with us so they can't be easily picked apart. And finally, find the right tone and messenger to relay these messages. NBJC is currently doing some testing with messengers from some of these different demographics described, and we'll be able to share that out on our social media platforms at NBJC on the Move, and of course on our website, nbjc.org. So again, thank you for your time. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions in the comment field that I can get to.
I'm gonna mute. Hey, also, first of all, I want to say thank you. That was so enlightening. So much information, so much good information. So I was going through the comments, and we have mostly people shouting you out, like co-signing things you were saying. You know, Barbara Martin said that she's interested. Chevalier Sharps was like active in the chat, shouting you out. Jonathan Ogebi found your shared fate piece quite interesting. Chevalier Sharps did have a question that should we as a community discuss Sister Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality more? Do we as Black people see ourselves as a monolith I'm just thinking out loud with where we are.
Yes, that's a great question. I have the honor and privilege to work with Professor Crenshaw as a part of the Freedom to Learn Network, fighting back against book bans, censorship, the attacks on critical race theory. And also, we did some work together around the AP Black Studies exclusion of Black womanism and Black LGBTQ studies, and also the exclusion of the movement for Black Lives Matter. And we 100% have to be highlighting and discussing Sister Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality. We have to make it plain what it means.
Yeah.
And one of the things is we gotta sometimes it's really, really what we're dealing with. I'm gonna keep it a buck. As someone who grew up in Eastern Hillsborough County, where they fly the like huge ass Confederate flag on the interstate before you get into my hometown of Brandon. There are white people who feel like when we talk about marginalized communities, that they're excluded and not a part of the conversation. When I talk to white conservatives and moderates, remind them that they have intersectional identities too, they're like, oh, I thought that was just for y'all. No, like everybody has intersecting identities. If you are a white man from the South who grew up on a farm, who didn't make a lot of money, who had to deal with, family members who might have been disabled, might be dealing with PTSD because you're a veteran coming from serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. You have intersecting identities too. They demonize it because they don't understand it. And on our side, we tend to just like let them not understand it and just be like, oh, they're just dumb. And I'm like, no, we have to explain what it is.
Yes.
We have to tee it up and feed it to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Understand what it is. And it was really disappointing to me that too many let Sister Professor Crenshaw out to dry when attacks were coming on intersectionality, which has been a concept long in the history of our people. Polly Murray talked about it with the term Jane Crow. In Sojourner Truth's speech, Ain't I a Woman? That is a lot of what she was naming. Intersectionality, that concept they knew. She was just smart enough to put a term to it and then link it to critical race theory, which looks at the ways in which our government uses race in public policy in ways that have harmed us over time and currently. All the truth.
All the truth.
Turn pages and like point you. So what do you mean about like right here, this particular policy line? We're talking about redlining, right, in cities. Like let's talk about that disproportionate. Because I look at the pictures, I don't see a lot of white people over there in the project public housing. So we have to do a better job of defending her, and I think that's a great question. I do think that some Black people do see us as a monolith, and it's why I do a course often with the Congressional Black Caucus's fellows and internship program about public policy with the intersecting lens. How to ensure that we are building public policy that leaves no Black people behind, so that there's no Black people trying to get crumbs from the table. Like we all need to be eaten. We all need to be fed good, right?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Milima said, wonderful presentation. They're excellent research. This is excellent research. This is the type of tools we need to counteract the power of propaganda information by D-Rump. Jonathan Ogebi said, yeah, Finding 4 was so pervasive and scary. Chevalier Sharps again. Jonathan Ogebi reminds me of the All Black Lives Matter slogan used by the Black Lives Matter movement. Again, Dr. Milima said, when I made a mental health presentation at a large AME church, I had more questions about the increased suicide rates than any other topic. In bigger picture policy, for example, Houston inadvertently voting against itself and the community. We are one. Rest in peace, Mr. Frankie Beverly. Then Dr. Milima was listening from the airport. We had people listening from the airport. We had people listening from Arizona. We had people chiming in from all over. Alex said, thank you so much. This is so interesting. Thank you so much for everything. Alex again said all facts. Chevalier Shop says, come on, speak, Victoria, because people was here. It's giving Shirley Chisholm too. It's giving Sister Shirley Chisholm too, yes. Originally from Louisiana, she hears you. This has been great. Some notes, first of all, Diego's story. That story that you shared about Diego, I was like, oh my gosh. Like in 2024, we still have people that have to that are having that experience, just in a different context, but the same context at the same time, right? Something you talk about proximity. Proximity does not save us. Just because we're in a certain space or around certain people doesn't mean people, I tell everybody all the time, just because I'm walking with someone that is white, don't mean they don't see me and they know that, I'm black and I'm gonna get the same hate. Like, trust me, when I walk outside, I didn't get a card that I can wave and be like, oh no, I have a white friend, it's fine, don't bother me. Don't judge me. That didn't happen. Right? When I go outside, I get the same stigmas, the same isms as anything else. Hate crimes against Black trans women is always something I'm always talking about, always advocating about, because I think it doesn't get enough airtime. Yeah, Chevalier, the white friend card, like I don't get that, right? So I'm getting the same thing. I think Black trans women, the attacks on Black trans women do not get enough airtime. So I'm always bringing that up. And it's crazy because when I hear about things happening within the Black LGBT community, especially, within the trans community, and I bring it up and they say, oh, well, we didn't hear about that, or we don't know about that, it's not as bad. I'm like, it's because you're not listening to people from that community. Because if you ask us, we'll tell you what's going on. Right. But far too many times, by the time it makes it to, the chief medical examiners, these people are, misgendered, and it's not showing up that way. Right. But I'm absolutely always advocating about bringing up the lived experiences of Black trans women and bring them to the table to speak about the lived experiences as well. Because something like you talked about earlier, we keep on having other people talking about their experiences. No, give this community a mic so they can speak in it on their own. And I think you're funny.
Oh, yeah.
I was over here jotting my notes. I think you're funny.
I'll be trying.
No. But again, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching with us. I know it's late. Go ahead.
I just have one. I want to leave y'all on a positive note real fast. And thank you for the comedy. It was a little bit. So I gave the example of the Black community not showing up for us in Houston, but I don't want to leave it there, because just a couple years later in North Carolina, actually, the next 2 years in North Carolina with HB2, we saw another bill that targeted trans people, particularly around bathroom inclusion, but it also gutted the civil rights employment court in North Carolina. So that if you were discriminated because you are Black on the job, you could no longer file suit in state court, which is cheaper and quicker than the federal route. That bill also gutted the ability for climate change related protections and union living wage protections, and gutted the ability for counties to pass human rights ordinances, so civil rights protections at the hyper-local level. And I got to give credit where credit is due. Bishop Barber was the North Carolina state director for the NAACP at the time, and galvanized Black pastors, Black civic leaders from different organizations, and a plethora of Moral Monday progressive organizations to not only repeal HB2 and to get rid of those bad laws, policies that were enshrined in it, and Black folks turned out to vote. But for the first time in North Carolina's history, over like 200-year history, a sitting governor was not reelected. And as a result, Roy Cooper, who's the governor there now, had a mandate to roll back HB2. And to push forward on policies that would be beneficial to Black and LGBTQ plus people. Because instead of letting our ops divide us, we united.
Yes.
And we worked together across our lines of differences to make sure that something that people thought could not happen, happened. They sent him packing. I can't even remember that man's name.
But you see what can happen when we, don't accept the status quo and get out and vote. right? And we get up and we don't sit it out and we don't be like, oh, well, we're in a comfortable whatever state. It's not going to matter. When we all get up and vote, we can make change. We can make things happen. Chevalier Sharp said his sister representative, Jasmine in Houston, will reach out on these issues. Now, why are we rolling back? Now, why are we rolling things back to these racial covenants that are still in the D's and tides?
Look, I almost used that as the example instead of the project example. I almost went there, but I was like, some of that is like, I was getting that, but I almost used that as my example. That and what happens on the other side of it, because under Secretary Marcia Fudge, because there's so many Black homeowners whose houses have been historically appraised for much lower than its value, under her leadership, under President Biden, equity, day one equity executive order, they put a plan in place where that can't happen anymore. And also there's a form of restitution as well that was created. And there are a lot of people who don't even know that program is in existence. But it seeks to, going back to generational wealth being one of the top 3 values, it's something that we have to make sure people know about. That's something that we earned with the vote 4 years ago. But we have to do a better job of educating our community about wins like that.
Yeah. Chevalier also said, I saw the study with the hetero Black couple in their pictures around the home. Appreciate it. I remember that. Yep. I remember that study. And that was, I can't even say it was surprising. This was almost like, I figured that. I figured that's how they do us. Yeah.
Honey, I'm in Prince George's County, Maryland. It is a majority Black, and I can literally look across the Potomac at a house that looks just like mine. That before this program came into place, appraised for $200,000 to $300,000 more than my home. Even though our income levels are similar, we still have the same Dollar Tree, no real casual, and no hate on the Dollar Tree. They take all my money on payday, but. We don't have a lot of casual dining options here. I look at Alexandria, I'm like, what's going on? You can't say it's about the income factor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's call it
racism. Blatant racism. And something you touched on again, when you were talking about North Carolina, that I'm just thinking back on, is how sometimes folks don't realize that some of these bills are interconnected to other things, right? Because the whole focus is on the bathroom bill, but look at all the things you listed out that it was connected to, and people didn't even know.
In the same bill.
All in the same bill.
All in the same bill. It wasn't like a different package. It was all HB2. But all they talked about was the bathroom part, because they wanted people to they were trying to slip in. They were using the trans community as a tool to, again, have Black folks vote against our interests.
Yep. Fair. It's still fair to people. About that trans people are going to be taking advantage of kids, and you said it right. It's not the trans people on To Catch a Predator.
That's right.
Hey, never seen that.
Siblings, aunts, and uncles.
Right. Thank you. Talk about that. So that's what the problem is. But anyway, you're gonna have me here preaching until 10 p.m. I do want to say again, thank you. We try to do this time of the day so that folks can watch. Folks can watch, and if they're at work, they can watch freely without having to, be judged. Keenan at the Black Gay Table Talk, Cooper Gilmore said, true, that needs to be amplified. These bills are loaded and have hidden and alternate things slid in. Absolutely. But we do this late so that we hope more people can watch freely in the privacy of their homes, on the way home from work, or in the airport, like the doctor was earlier. Thank you so much again, Victoria. Thank you so much for the work MBJC does. Always a pleasure working with you. I look forward to continue working with you again. And thank you. Anything closing thoughts?
We're good.
We're good. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching us. Have a good night.